Can you believe that the Biden administration, with a straight face, is actually claiming that they inherited no plan for the vaccine distribution?
It's important for the American people to know what we inherited when the president came into office. And what he inherited was not enough supply, not enough vaccinators, not enough places for vaccinations to happen. Communities had been left to fend for themselves. And so that's what he's been focused on and working on.
There was no stockpile, right? It's in many ways
no stockpile
of vaccines, right? So we're looking at this. There was no national strategy or plan for vaccinations. We were leaving it to the states and local leaders to try and figure it out. And so in many ways, we're starting from scratch.
The biggest thing, though, as you remember, when you and I shouldn't say it that way, as you remember, but when you and I talked last, we talked about it's one thing to have the vaccine, which we didn't have when we came into office, but a vaccinator. How do you get the vaccine into someone's arm?
No plan. Paging Dr. Fauci.
We certainly are not starting from scratch because there is activity going on in the distribution. But if you look at the plan that the president has put forth about the things that he is going to do, namely get community vaccine centers up, get pharmacies more involved, where appropriate, get the Defense Production Act involved, not only perhaps with getting more vaccine, but even the things you need to get a good vaccine program. For example, needles and syringes that might be more useful in that. So it's taking what's gone on, but amplifying it in a big way.
Now, what does the Washington Post fact checker say about what Joe Biden just said? Well, they called it a verbal stumble. I kid you not. It was a verbal stumble, a typical Biden gaffe, as he had already mentioned 50 million doses being available when he took office. Ex-Trump officials should especially cool the outrage meter as it just looks silly, end of quote. Here's the problem, Mr. Kessler. If this were a one-off, that would be one thing, pardon the pun, but it's not. Biden has lied for over 30 years about his civil rights record, as we've chronicled before.
When I was 17 years old, like many of you, I participated in sit-ins to desegregate the restaurants and movie houses of Wilmington, Delaware.
I came out of the civil rights movement. I was one of those guys that sat in and marched and all that stuff. During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else. I was a suburbanite kid who got a dose of exposure to what was happening to black Americans when I'm in my own city.
You know, when I was a teenager in Delaware, for real, I got involved in the civil rights movement. We have the 8th largest black population in America. Most people don't know that. And I'd go to 8 o'clock Mass, then I'd go to Reverend Herring's church where we'd meet in order to organize and figure where we were going to go, whether we were going to desegregate the Rialto movie theater or what we were going to do. I got my education for real in the black church. And that's not hyperbole, it's a fact. But I got my education, Reverend Doc, in the black church. Not a joke. Because when we used to get organized on Sundays to go out and desegregate movie theaters and things like that, we do it through the black church.
Well, that ain't what the New York Times found out, as reported by CNN's Jake Tapper.
New York Times reports, quote, more than once, advisors had gently reminded Mr. Biden of the problem with this formulation. He had not actually marched during the civil rights movement, and more than once, Mr. Biden assured them that he understood and kept telling the story anyway.
Then there's the Nelson Mandela lie.
This day, 30 years ago, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and entered into discussions about apartheid. I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador at the streets of Soweto to get to see him on Robbins Island.
I came back from South Africa trying to see Nelson Mandela and getting arrested for trying to see him on Robben Island. He was in prison.
Then there's the NAACP lie.
Look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run.
One slight problem, Nelson Mandela, it was a lie. He never got arrested trying to visit Nelson Mandela, and Nelson Mandela never came to the White House after Nelson Mandela got out of prison to thank then Vice President Joe Biden for attempting to see me. The whole thing turned out to be false, just as Joe Biden falsely asserted that the NAACP endorsed him in every single race, when in fact the NAACP, as a 501c3 organization, cannot endorse a political candidate. Aside from that, now we come to the lie about the man who tragically struck and killed Joe Biden's first wife and daughter.
Just a week before Christmas 1972, the wife of newly elected Senator Joe Biden and their baby daughter were killed, and their two sons badly injured when the Biden family car was broadsided by a truck at this intersection in Delaware. The truck driver, Curtis Dunn, was never charged in the crash, but his daughter, Pam Hamill, says he too suffered.
He grieved over that. He was haunted and tormented by that for years.
Dunn died in 1999, but since then his family has endured widespread rumors and reports that he had been drinking just before the collision. At least twice, Biden himself has made public references to alcohol being involved in the crash. In 2007, Biden said the truck driver, quote, allegedly drank his lunch. And multiple news outlets, including CBS News, have reported that Dunn was drunk.
The truth is, it was a tragic accident. No alcohol was involved.
The police reports have been lost, but Delaware Judge Jerome Herlihy, who investigated the crash, supports Hamill. He tells CBS News there was no indication that the truck driver had been drinking. Last fall, a spokesman for Biden said Biden fully accepts the Dunn family's word that these rumors were false. Now, Pam Hamill simply wants the record to be cleared.
He was a good, hardworking man and a wonderful father.
And her father's reputation restored.
And of course, Joe Biden perpetuated the lie that Donald Trump said there were good Nazis and bad Nazis on both sides.
Charlottesville is also home to a defining moment for this nation in the last few years. It was there on August of 2017 we saw Klansmen and white supremacists and neo-Nazis come out in the open. Their crazed faces, illuminated by torches, veins bulging and bearing the fangs of racism, chanting the same anti-Semitic bile heard across Europe in the 30s. And they were met by a courageous group of Americans, and a violent clash ensued. And a brave young woman lost her life. And that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides?
Paging Jake Tapper.
Let's play some of the sound of President Trump back in 2017, saying he had said today that he answered the question perfectly. Let's take a listen.
Neo-Nazis started this. They showed up in Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest.
Excuse me, they didn't put themselves down as neo, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Now, elsewhere in those remarks, the president did condemn neo-Nazis and white supremacists. So he's not saying that the neo-Nazis and white supremacists are very fine people.
And Jake Tapper's colleague, Michael Schmaconish, confirmed it.
Within the last 10 days, I know that I made reference to those words from the president, and I had a phone caller who called and said, that is not what the president said. Now, having invested the time to go back and zapruder the tape, I think the caller's right, and I think you're right. I think it's true. He had done himself a favor if he had verbalized it the way you have with the words monument debate.
And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally.
Joe Biden also repeated the Donald Trump told people to drink bleach to combat coronavirus lie.
I think there's a growing awareness that, injecting bleach into your system doesn't do it for you. And I'm being, think about all the ridiculous things. And
Donna Brazile, meet Greg Gutfeld.
And by the way, if Joe Biden goes out there one day and asks people to drink bleach as a way of fighting a pandemic, God knows he'll
that never happened, Donna.
Yes,
you got fed a lie there.
That
never happened, Donna. You got fed a lie. Never happened. If you're going to say that on the show, you got to have the clip. Never happened.
Well, get the clip.
All right.
Because of
Good luck. Get the clip, Donna. Good
whatever
luck.
you want to call
I'll buy you a steak dinner if you find that clip.
No, I mean, look.
It never happened.
I don't want no dinner
I'm just
from you, baby.
I'm just trying to be honest.
Oh, yes, he did.
If you're going to bring up something that's not true, we got to point it out. That's what we do.
So, what happened to the fact checkers? Where have they gone? Are they somewhere hiding?
What happened? Your balls drop off?
And don't forget, we have been demonetized by YouTube, so please, if you want Larry uncensored and on demand, go to LarryTube.com. That's just LarryTube.com because we've got a country to save. See you next time.